And welcome in, everybody. Another edition here of the Auburn Undercover podcast on the 24/7 Sports Network. My name is Nathan King. I am joined tonight, if you will, recording this here on a Tuesday evening, by Jason Caldwell. And fall camp is right around the corner for Auburn. Not even right around the corner. It is right now. You'll probably be listening to this on Wednesday morning. That's the day Auburn players report, and they will get rolling on Thursday. And it's crazy to say, Jason, that when we're there this week, I mean, Auburn will be playing a game that month. I mean, it comes up on you pretty quickly, but this is a little bit different feeling. I think a lot different feeling than, year one under Freeze, his first preseason. There were so many question marks, and there's question marks with every team, but we just kind of didn't really know how things were going to go, what his system was like, what pieces they already had in place. I feel like this year, despite the question marks that they have, we sort of know what we have going into this fall camp. We know what boxes they need to check. And I think the coaching staff might feel the same way too. I think this is going to be a streamlined few weeks of practice. I think they know what they need to look at here.
Yeah, I think the first thing is that we knew going in, and they found out coming in, that last year was going to be just a total rebuild of a roster except for a few positions, and that's what happened. And sometimes you hit on those, and sometimes you don't. I mean, a wide receiver, it just didn't work out. They had to do what they had to do to try to find enough bodies to play. But obviously, the group just wasn't good enough. I think they've done a much better job, obviously, in the recruiting part of it, in the portal part of that, at wide receiver. Offensive line has been the biggest rebuild over the last couple of years. Defensive line, they got a lot more bodies. Can they find a couple of guys to really take over and do some things? Obviously, a bunch of youth in the secondary. But I think we know the roster is better in terms of talent. Is it good enough to go compete in Tuscaloosa, in Athens, in Columbia, Missouri, even in Lexington? We'll find that out, because that's been the issue for them the last few years. I mean, the New Mexico State game is an outlier, just kind of a crazy game. Georgia, Alabama here competed well, beat Texas A&M. They played pretty good at home. Can you start to be good enough to go on the road? And that'll be the big question this year. But you're right about the staff, the streamlining of that. I think that's the biggest thing you look at. And Derek Nix, Ken Austin, all those guys on the offensive side of the ball that have worked together or worked with Hugh Freeze, I think that's a big deal. And so we'll see how that goes in camp and preseason camp. But there are a lot of storylines, a lot of things to watch for, but I do think those are some things that I feel probably much better about in year two than we maybe didn't even have a grasp on last year at this time.
Yeah, I'm eager to see, what sort of tangible responses I guess we can get from seeing a new staff in place, from seeing DJ Durkin in place, from seeing that offensive familiarity. Like, it's something Freeze has talked about. It's probably his most consistent talking point of this entire offseason has been that familiarity on the offensive staff. And then a little bit of an aside is, I think, DJ Durkin and what he's done on defense. I think they feel like they have a better fit there. But what is that going to mean in the preseason? Like, what can we realistically see from having a more familiar staff? I think it'll just be a lot of, honestly, it'll kind of be a lot of what we heard in the spring, I think, which is from somebody like Peyton Thorne, talking about how the system is a little bit more streamlined for him. Things don't feel as clunky for him working there at quarterback. We expect starting Thursday at practice. We expect Peyton Thorne to get first team reps. Freeze said it in the spring. He said, it's his job, and then nothing really changed. If anything, you and I and everybody else out there saw a really good spring from Peyton Thorne, in fact. Just a lot of things working really well for him. But as we'll kind of go through here, I think position battles is probably kind of the best way to sort of segment this. I think backup quarterback kind of gets an honorable mention when you're talking of, hey, what position battles are important this preseason, because you're one injury away from that being a very important guy. And I think in terms of a three-way battle, I think that could be a pretty good competition this preseason.
I think it's actually one of the biggest ones, because it's one of the few positions where you don't play multiple guys. Offensive line, you don't normally play a bunch of guys. But if you get to 7 or 8, you might have some interchangeable parts. Everywhere else you're going to probably rotate guys. Obviously on the defensive line, at wide receiver, running back, So the backup quarterback becomes an important part of things because that guy's you're right, one play away from becoming a really important player on this team. That'll be one I'm anxious to see because whoever steps up in that role, which one of the three it is, could be in line to get some playing time, especially early in the year. Peyton Thorne's played a lot of football. It is a new offense again. There's a lot of new pieces, and so you want to give those guys every opportunity early in the season to try to build some rhythm and do some of those things. But you also want to give that other guy a chance to get some snaps in case he has to play. So whoever that guy is could be in line to get some playing time, and could be a guy that might end up being one of the more important guys of the season. If you were to have an injury or Peyton Thorne doesn't play well and that guy gets his shot, you never know what happens.
I mean, this is not at all a guarantee. I mean, Thorne had a good spring. I think there are a lot of factors working against everybody else. Like it's a very uphill battle. But you get around to the Oklahoma game, the Arkansas game, what have you, and things have been looking clunky and you want to make a change. Freeze has proven that he's not above that, that he's willing to do that. And so for a couple of different reasons, this could be a really important position for them. Backup quarterback always matters a lot. I'm interested to see what kind of steps Walker White can take. I think he was kind of swimming in the spring as a lot of true freshmen do, particularly at quarterback. What does a full off season look like? Because he's got maybe the best athletic tools in that room. So that'll be really interesting to watch. Moving through the offense here, another position that we've been talking about all off season. How is this wide receiver group going to shake out? I'll be really interested to see the lineups on day one of practice. Of course, they will change a bunch. Would not be shocked if your main three receivers on day one are some combination of Cam Coleman, Robert Lewis, maybe Keandre Lambert-Smith. I think he'll be the guy. He'll be in the starting rotation by the end of this thing. But he's somebody, Jason, that I'm interested to see sort of what that looks like over the course of the next couple weeks because he's got to get up to speed a little bit. Wasn't here in the spring. They expect him to be a starting caliber receiver. But the guy you've talked about a bunch, someone like Sam Jackson, like he was a starter for most of the spring. I don't think his role is just going to go away here. Then you get somebody like Perry Thompson. Then you get somebody like Caleb Burton, who has a lot of experience coming off of last year's team. It's a really, really interesting two deep that they've got to iron out here. And I think they feel pretty good about every single player in that two deep.
There's something to be said for quarterback wide receiver chemistry. And Peyton Thorne and Sam Jackson are roommates. They were high school teammates. They've known each other a long time. And I think he's a guy that's going to play a lot and have some big plays in this offense. And we saw him even in the spring, even though he was non-contact, go up and make some plays and do some stuff. He may be the quickest of the bunch. Now, Malcolm Simmons will say something about that, and Bryce Kane, some of those guys, but Sam Jackson is really quick and explosive and is a little bit bigger than you might think he is. I mean, you think about him looking small at quarterback, but all of a sudden he goes out to wide receiver and he's not tiny. But I think he's going to have an impact. You're right. Robert Lewis, a guy that we would expect to play a bunch. Obviously, Cam Coleman. And you're right, Keandre Lambert-Smith. How quickly can he get ingrained in the offense? He's an older guy and has played at a much higher level than we saw those guys come in last year that tried to make that same jump. So I think that allows him to go and be ready. And we've heard guys say, hey, look, this guy's a pro. He's out there doing the things. So I think he'll be there. The question is going to be, how many can you play? How much of a role and which one of these other guys can jump in there? Can Camden Brown become a guy? Can he become that consistent guy? Can he stay healthy? Because he's got the physical tools. And obviously you think about, Ohio State transfer from last year that I just went blank on.
Yeah, Caleb Burton.
Really athletic, really, really fast, physical kid. And then obviously you look and Perry Thompson, Malcolm Simmons, the two new additions. How quickly can they find it? So, I mean, there's no shortage of talent, and that's a good starting spot to have a wide receiver.
Yeah, I wonder about a guy like, we've talked about this on the show before, but I wonder how much of an emphasis Freeze and the staff had in that second portal window saying, okay, we have to get a guy in that receiver who's done it on the Power 5 level. Because last year you had a couple group of 5 guys, FCS in Jackson State, And so that just didn't translate properly. Only one of them from those 4 transfers last year really did much of anything, and it was Caleb Burton. It's like a former top 75 overall recruit who came up from Ohio State. And so I think they sort of learned their lesson, but at the same time, it's never easy for anybody to miss spring. And so, but talk from Peyton Thorne at SEC Media Days, like we just didn't hear these kinds of things last year about the rapport he has with Keandre Lambert-Smith. Even Hugh Freeze said, he talks to people in the building, and he's talked to Peyton Thorne about what he's seen from Keandre Lambert-Smith in workouts. I think they're going to be just fine in terms of that addition. And then Cam Coleman, we're sitting here and we just assume, like we just kind of say, hey, he'll be in there, he'll be a starter, and he'll be awesome, because at this point we have no reason to think otherwise. On the I think the offensive line kind of would be surprised if the starting group, you don't have Percy Lewis, Dylan Wade, Connor Liu, Jeremiah Wright, and Tutal Miller at right tackle. A guy I wrote about this week, Jason, as a potential sort of sophomore breakout guy is Tyler Johnson. Freeze said it at Media Days. He said, I want him to come on and be that swing tackle.
Yep.
Like that's a big role. That's a big responsibility for a guy who's a sophomore, and that shows how much this staff really, really likes him. I think Tutal Miller's got that spot at right tackle, but it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see if Tyler Johnson can push a little bit, or a guy like Seth Wilford in there as well.
Yeah, I think Tyler's a guy that absolutely is in the mix at right tackle. Now, Tutal has a big advantage. He played a lot of football and has played, but Tyler's probably the most athletic of those guys. Is he prepared to now be an SEC guy? I think that's the question. Like, okay, are you ready to be that guy every down and do those things? I mentioned offensive line. I mean, it's the biggest difference in 19, 20 months by a mile. They've got a lot of. You just mentioned Seth Wilford. I mean, they've got 4 legit tackles. You also have a talented true freshman, a guy that's going. It's going to take him a little while to get going. But you start talking 4 or 5 offensive tackles. You bring in a transfer that has experience, that gives you another guy to play at offensive tackle, from this summer. And so you look at those, and then you look inside and you go, man, Jaden Muskrat's a guy that can play tackle, but is probably better suited to be a guard. You already got Dylan Wade, and you got Jeremiah Wright, you got Tate Johnson, you got Braden Joyner, you got EJ Eston Harris, EJ Harris, Dylan Cinda. They're a bunch of guys, and that is, again, a good position to have, because they're going to create some competition. But the guy, Jeremiah Wright's the guy for me that has a chance to really become the guy that everybody hoped he would be. I think we've seen that out of him. If he can stay healthy, it's the first spring he's ever had where he's able to go practice. So he's able to go out there and get some reps and do those things. He's had a good summer. He has taken on a huge leadership role off the field for this team in recruiting, doing all these things. And man, if that guy shows up on Saturdays with Dylan Wade and Connor Liu, if those tackles can play well, this is an Auburn offensive line that has a chance to be a team strength. And if you do that, and you got Jarquez Hunter, and you got Damari Austin and Cobb, all of a sudden the tight end game opens up. Rivaldo, it holds a lot of keys for this team. And so I think that offensive line group is definitely one to watch.
I think everybody in that building is rooting for Jeremiah Wright. He's somebody that Jake Thornton talks about a lot. And like you said, kind of putting everything together for him. Like, he has had a roller coaster of an Auburn career. Things have been very up and down in terms of position changes, in terms of injuries. He hasn't been solidified at one spot with one coach in one position on the offensive line for very long at all. And so they're hoping, hey, just stick him, keep him there at right guard. And you're right. I think he gets somebody. He's somebody who could be a team captain this year. As well. Just every time you see Jeremiah in the building, he's always just got a big smile on his face. And so, yeah, I mean, that is solidified, as confident as they are with the offensive line right now, there could be a couple spots that we'll see competition at throughout the preseason. On the other line of scrimmage, Jason, I think, could be the most important one on the entire team. You and I have talked about it for like 6 months now. I mean, we're going to see it. We're now going to finally see what separation there will be at defensive tackle. I say defensive tackle because I think ends and edge rushers, they feel pretty solid about those 2 groups. But those interior guys, they're going to play 5 or 6 or 7 of them. And, who's going to rise to the top of this thing? That's going to be a real determining factor for this defense and probably the entire team this season.
Yeah, I think it starts with Keldrick Faulk. because I think we're going to see Keldrick Falk play defensive end, but I think we're also going to see him slide inside and play some defensive tackle. I think we're going to see him multiple roles. Maybe Malik Blockton could do some of the same things, but I think we're going to see Keldrick Falk be inside on third downs, maybe even earlier than that, depending on the opponent and kind of the way they play. So I think he's kind of the starting point for me. Can he take that big jump between year one and year two? But you're right. On the interior, you have Jason Jones coming back. You got Zykevis Walker. You got, Bobby Jameson Travis, and you got Darren Reed. You had some guys coming back, but then you add Gage Keys and you start to talk about, adding some transfer portal pieces. So you get a chance to see, Gage Keys in the spring, and you get a chance to see, this went blank again on our other transfer in the spring. Oh, Trill Carter. Got a chance to see Trill Carter in spring. So you have Keys in spring and Trill Carter in spring. Got a chance to see them, and then bring in two more. You bring in Philip Bleedy and Isaiah Rakes, guys that have played at the highest level. Bleedy played in the Big Ten, and you played Ohio State, and you played Michigan, you played teams like that. Rakes has played in this league at Texas A&M. Big physical body guys. And then we mentioned Malik Blockson and TJ Lindsey, and there are a bunch of guys. I mean, for 3 spots, there's 11 or 12 potential guys that could play those roles, and that's huge when you start talking about the turnover. They're going to rotate those guys, but Nathan, we said it. Can you find a guy or two to become dominant kind of guys? Because that's where it takes it to another level. Can you find a guy? I mean, Marcus Harris did a good job of that last year. Obviously, Colby Wooden was that guy. Derek Hall coming off the edge. I think we feel good about Jalen McLeod. I think Keldrick Falk's going to be good. But I think we're going to see a lot of moving parts for this. Kieron Crawford coming in as a pass rusher gives you a little bit bigger body. Maybe you can play, those two guys at the same time and slide Keldrick Falk in. You get some serious speed maybe on third down. So there are going to be a lot of options for them on the defensive front and create a lot of competition for sure.
Yeah, my bet right now is that Isaiah Rakes is going to make an impact.
I agree.
I just think
we've heard a lot about the two guys coming in this summer. We've heard a lot about both those guys.
Yeah, and Bleedy. Yeah, I think Rakes, Bleedy, and look, another guy coming out in the summer is Kieron Crawford that you mentioned. Like those, not to take anything away from Gage Keys and Trill Carter, because I think them being here in the spring as well could make a difference. Look, Gage Keys is a guy that I don't think I was talking to somebody about this a few days ago. Like, you can't turn your nose up at the fact that he was a first-team defensive lineman almost the entire spring. Added on to the fact that, I mean, he was, if you look at his tape from Kansas last year, he is a few plays away from having like 5.5 sacks and 6 tackles for loss at Kansas last year. Like, they absolutely loved his tape. And so I think that makes a difference, him being here in the spring. At the same time, the reason I keep coming back to Rakes is his connection with DJ Durkin, already having been a part of this defense in some fashion at Texas A&M. And he played his best ball last year. He played the best ball of his career. That was a really talented Texas A&M defensive front. We know about the talent that they have year after year. He was the best run stuffer of that group, according to Pro Football Focus. And so lots of tools. I think those 3 guys, though, I think Rakes, Bleedy, and Kieron Crawford, if each of them perform pretty well at those positions, I think they'll be in a good spot. Crawford specifically, I'm interested to see kind of what role they can put him in with Jalen McLeod, because Free said at Media Days, he said, look, I don't know how much live reps I'm going to put Jalen McLeod in, just because you don't want that again. You don't want that. I mean, that would be so frustrating if they had to deal with that all over again. You know what you've got with him. I think their plan for a guy like Jalen McLeod this year, who's one of the top returning sack players in the SEC, play him less, but play him fresher. Like, he will be better because he will be playing less. I mean, Freeze said it a bunch. He said, he played way too many snaps this year. And so I think on that note, you're going to see at every D-line position, you're going to see a lot of rotation this year. You're going to see a lot of different guys, probably more than we have the past few seasons.
Yeah, no, you're right. And you got some young guys, some freshmen that'll have a chance to step in and play some of those roles and give you some different looks at, rushing the passer. So, again, I think it comes back to and it's funny, our sit down with Vontrell King Williams a couple weeks ago, he said something that really jumped out to me. He said it's a rep chart, not a depth chart. And that's exactly what this defensive line is going to be. It's going to be a rep chart. And he said, if somebody gets a hot hand, that's a guy that's going to play more. And so you'll still rotate guys, but in the fourth quarter, the starter might not be on the field. It may be the guy that's had the best game that day. And I think that's the way it should be. That's the way defensive lines have always kind of, been at their best. And I think back to the, the 1980s, you had Tracy Rocker and Nate Hill and Ron Stallworth and Benji Rowland, but you also had Robert Pig Goff and a bunch of guys that could come in and create havoc as the second team guys and, played in the NFL and did their own thing. If you got guys that are pushing the guys behind you and you can rotate guys and keep guys fresh, that's how a defensive line becomes a winning defensive line group for sure.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't even mention those freshman guys. Shoot, I mean, Amaris Williams, he could be really nasty if he puts it together in year one.
I think he's a guy too that if you have Keldrick Falk inside some and you want to go Amaris Williams as a bigger defensive end and have Keldrick Falk inside and do some different. Again, there are a lot of different groups that you could see together that could do some different things on this defense.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, Jamonte Waller was really highly rated recruit there on the edge. Linebacker, I think it's probably one of their more comfortable position groups on the roster, especially since they added I'm not 100% on his pronunciation of his first name, Gote from
Dorian Mausi.
And Mausi from Duke in the spring. I think those three, Mausi, Austin Keys, and obviously Eugene Asante, that sort of makes up your primary group. Talking about the rep chart, they're going to get a lot of the reps throughout the season. Gote, I think, sort of bridges the gap between, hey, DeMarcus Riddick, you're really good and we want to see you on the field, but if something, if there were to be an injury, one of those main guys, we don't need you to play a giant role this season. Yeah. They can kind of stop and fill that gap there. Robert Woodyard is a guy that, I think we're all sort of looking around and seeing when he'll make an impact. He did have a really good spring. People forget that he had that injury his first year at Auburn. Really, really good athlete. Still one of the more talented players on this team. I think, and this is a group that DJ Durkin is obviously coaching these guys. And so this is a group where I wouldn't be surprised if we see one sort of standout player that we weren't expecting coming over from the spring, other than a Eugene Asante and a Mausi and Austin Keys.
Yeah, I mean, those are the guys. I mean, DJ Barber's the other true freshman that had a really good spring as well. And DeMarcus Riddick, I saw him over the weekend, and he's put on some muscle. He's much bigger and more physical, and he's always had the athleticism. So it'd be interesting to see how much he gets in the mix. I think he'll be a special teams guy for sure. But you're right. They added some guys. All those guys are transfer guys that have come in, those older group. Austin Keys is a guy that I believe could have a big impact on this team. Obviously has some history with Durkin. He's a big physical guy and gives you a different look there at linebacker. And then Mausi's a guy that's just a steady team captain kind of guy. So I think it's actually a pretty solid and pretty strong linebacker group there for probably just those two spots that you usually have on the field at times.
Yeah, Austin Keys is kind of one of my sleeper guys on this team heading into the fall because I think people forget, he had that thumb, but he also missed the last scrimmage of last fall with a shoulder issue that he had been dealing with all fall. You're already a transfer guy coming over. And as you mentioned a couple shows ago with somebody like Keldrick Falk, anytime you have wrist, thumb, hand, that's going to limit you in the weight room. Austin Keys put on 15 pounds this offseason, according to their roster online. And so that's given you a bigger, sort of bulkier middle linebacker there. And so I think with another year in the system, with no injury free, another guy who played under DJ Durkin previously at Ole Miss, he was his position coach. And so I wonder if he can maybe take a step forward. And then the secondary, where it's going to be new look all over the place. That number 3 cornerback spot is really, really interesting to me. We thought we knew where they were headed there with a guy like Colton Hood. He obviously transfers out. I think you have a bevy of options here. Wouldn't surprise me if someone like Jay Crawford continues to step up. I think, him being a true freshman, he could absolutely play there as well, but heard great things about Antonio Kite this offseason. And, JC Hart is a 6'2", 200-pound gazelle of an athlete that Wesley McGriff feels great about. And so Kyan Lee and Keontae Scott, we'll just sort of shelf them for now. Auburn feels great about having them two at corner, but that number 3 player historically gets a lot of reps. Like that is a really important role on the roster. So it'll be interesting to see how that rotation fills out this preseason.
Yeah, maybe the two most important guys on this entire football team, maybe Lee and Keontae Scott, just because of Kane played a lot last year, but Keontae obviously who he is, because you don't have a lot of experience depth. Now you got really talented, really athletic guys, J.C. Hart and Antonio Kite, along with Malcolm Simmons, maybe the two of the more freakish athletes on this entire roster. How quickly can they settle into this defensive scheme and to be in those cornerback guys? Kite has a couple of years under his belt. Obviously, JC went last year, 1 year, didn't have a ton of that background at Lochapoka where they don't throw it a ton in 1A. But those are two guys that physically, give you, those vibes of Jamel Dean. I think with JC Hart, a guy like Jamel Dean that you look up and he's 6'2.5", 210, and he's playing corner, and he's one of the fastest guys on the field. Kite's just as athletic as it gets. So that's the good thing. The good thing is you have some guys that you go, hey, you're not going to be short on athleticism, size, or speed. Can they go out and get it done and not change it the way you play a little bit at times? But I do think that's another one of the more interesting things. And you mentioned true freshman that comes in and goes through spring and has all the tools. So that'll be a really a good one to watch too, is how that second group kind of pans out.
Yeah, and then the last one we'll talk about, and then we're rolling right into Thursday. It's still a competition there at safety. They lost both their starters from last year, both Jalen Simpson and Zion Puckett. If you want to count a guy like Donovan Kaufman leaving at nickel as well, if you want to count Keontae Scott leaving from nickel and going to corner, tons of reps are up for grabs from last season at the nickel and safety spots. At safety, the primary guys exiting the spring, Jaron Thompson, the Texas transfer, and then Sylvester Smith, the sophomore that I think is just going to be awesome. There's a reason that a young guy gets on the field that much in the spring. It's Charles Kelly thinks very highly of him. But how the rest of that rotation shakes out, who are the 5 or 6 most consistent players between safety and nickel? Champ Anthony, I think, is the guy at nickel, right now. Whether that changes with somebody like Caleb Wooden, whether Wooden plays more safety or nickel, how does Terrence Love fit in? He's basically looks like a athletic, fast linebacker out there at safety, and so another spot where they have a lot of options. Other than Jaron Thompson, though, not a ton of proven guys here. This is a group where, other than Jaron, assuming that he's going to get a pretty important role in this defense, other than him, it's going to be a dice roll on a lot of these guys. They're going to have to trust that this recruiting they've done over the last couple of years is going to pay off here.
Yeah, I think a guy like Kinsley Faustin could be a guy to watch at the nickel position as well, a guy that does some of those things. But you're right. The good thing about safety is it is a talented group. You mentioned Jaron Thompson coming in. I think he's the guy that you kind of start with there. But T Love is back year number 2. Sylvester Smith's back for year number 2. Caleb Wooden has had a really good spring and summer from what I've been told. And so I think Caleb Wooden's a guy to absolutely watch, maybe at that other safety spot. But then you look at you have Aquan Robinson coming in, junior coach safety that's done some things. Caleb Harris, a true freshman from Thompson, is absolutely a guy to watch, though. I think he is a guy that can play, can do some things, and they loved him coming out of spring. And then Amon Lane Gaines and nickel too. I think that's his natural spot. True freshman, but gives you a really dynamic athlete right there. So again, I think like defensive line, I think about that in terms of maybe the safety spot is got. You may have 7 or 8 different guys that you feel like, hey, maybe we need to see those guys on the field and see what they do. And so I think I create a ton of competition at those spots.
Yeah, I was going to ask about Amon. I mean, that's a guy that you and Christian watched a lot in high school. We didn't see him in the spring, so I was kind of wondering whether he's going to be a corner or more of a nickel.
Yeah, I think he'll be more of a true nickel. I think that's who he is in playing in short, tight windows, physical, come up, run support. I think that's where he'll probably most likely be.
Yeah. Well, Eugene Asante sort of corroborated what you just said about Caleb Wooden. He was the first guy he mentioned at media days when asked who's been standing out this summer in summer workouts, and the first person he mentioned was Caleb Wooden, the guy who is all of a sudden, congrats, you're a veteran of the group.
Yes. Yep.
because the other guys have moved out. So it's crazy to say about someone who seemed like he was such a young player just a couple years ago. And so We will get rolling, like I said, on Thursday. Kind of wanted to give you guys just sort of a position overview, what we'll be watching for at each position. It seems like it's going to be morning practices.
I think
seems
I
like
think probably for the most part until they get to school starts, which I believe is the 19th, something like
yeah,
that.
18th or 19th, something like that.
I think probably the first couple of weeks, so they'll be mostly mornings, and then obviously once school starts, then it'll transition. They'll get to afternoon practice, so should be mostly mornings during these weeks, these first couple of weeks of practice. So hopefully, give people lunchtime reading and some viewing windows, things like that.
I was just about to say, I made mention of that so that you guys know we'll have the practice reports, photos, stories, everything. Obviously, we're going to unload all the content for you guys around lunchtime every day. That's where a lot of it will be. But of course, as we do every day at Auburn Undercover, it'll be all day long. It'll be 24/7 for you guys. So you can get 60% off right now. We have a fall camp special. Be sure to take advantage of that. You can read all of Jason and Christian's Big Cat stuff. This is not a recruiting episode. You guys have had one of those this week, but it's been
still a bunch,
very successful
out there.
Yeah,
it's you can play catch up and read. There's still some to come, I believe. So,
yep.
I got some thoughts actually from Caleb Harris for tomorrow. I talked to him last night. He was at Anquan Fagan's announcement, so talked to Caleb about obviously Anquan, but about getting ready for his first season and some of those things. So that'll be on the site tomorrow as well.
Well, there you go. A little teaser for you guys. But yeah, so it should be in the mornings. Practices should be nice for everybody to be out there kind of in the cooler part of the day. And then you guys can catch up on what happened around lunchtime. So it is fall camp all of a sudden, and we're super excited for it over at Auburn Undercover. We appreciate everybody tuning in. Thanks to Jason for coming on today as well. You guys can catch us later this week. I would imagine we'll probably have another episode recapping the first couple of days of practice. And like Jason said, potentially some other recruiting news down the line. We will talk to you guys later. Everybody enjoy your week, and we will see y'all at Auburn Undercover.